Welcome, everyone. It's great to have you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your patience. We'll start. There will be a few people coming to this session who are currently in the session which is finishing up at the auditorium. But to respect time, we'll go ahead and they'll join us. So you're very welcome. It's great to have you with us. I think as we look at some of the changes that have taken place as far as land tenure and land rights over the last years, we've seen over the last couple of decades an increasing awareness of the importance of land rights and land tenure to development, to food security, to human well-being. And not just an awareness, but we've seen a lot of action as well by governments, by development partners towards securing land rights. What we haven't seen so much within that is really an appreciation and action on the importance of collective land rights or common land rights. We've seen a lot of emphasis on individual land rights. And so that's what this session is about. It's about looking at the collective aspect of land rights and land rights over community areas, over the commons. And it's a practical panel. It's applied. It's bringing all kinds of different experience from around the world. And it's asking ourselves, why is this so important? And what can we be doing about it? Now, it's not completely ignored. I think we are seeing the beginning of a change. And that's why we see this as an opportune time to put it, to have this discussion and add momentum to that change that we're seeing. I think one of the factors provoking this is in the very title of this weekend is a great and great appreciation of understanding and managing and using and interacting with ecosystems at the landscape level and not down to individual parcels. But another big one as well is that we're hearing more and more the collective voices of land users themselves saying, we use this land as communities. We relate to this land as societies. Our relations to each other as people is based on our common relationship to our lands and our territories. And Indigenous people's voices are foremost among those. So we're seeing growing momentum, and we'd like to add momentum to that with this session. And also, we have a bigger plan. We have a bigger vision. Many of the people who will be speaking are part of a global call to action, which will be launched in early 2016 on doubling the amount of land which is owned and controlled by Indigenous peoples and local communities. So this is something that many of us are part of working towards. Some of you may already have signed up and be part of it, but you'll hear more about it during the session. So we've got a really, really good lineup of speakers. We're very privileged to have the people that we've got. I'll introduce them to you now, and then we'll, as we go through, then you'll hear from each of them. Many of them don't need introduction, I guess. The first is Ruth Mines-Dick. Ruth works for IFPRI. She's a senior research fellow there, and she's been managing. I think she started the Capri program on collective action and property rights. Ruth is a real champion of the commons. She's been president of the International Association of the Study of the Commons. She's been a student of Eleanor Ostrom and has been a real voice, not only within academia, but within the work of practitioners as well on the commons. So it's great to have you, Ruth. Thank you for joining us. Next to Ruth, we have Professor Etienne Leroy. He's Professor Emeritus of Legal Anthropology at Sorbonne here in Paris. I'm also an anthropologist, and I know that Etienne has trained many people of my generation and of the next generation in anthropology. So he's a real senior figure of anthropology, and again, not only an academic, a very strong academic, but also somebody who's engaged in policy. He's an advisor to the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs through the Comité Technique Foncier, the Land Tenure Committee, which advises a group of experts which advise the French government, and he actually was the one who set it up. We then have Jagdish Ra, a very unassuming man, but somebody who has impacted the lives of literally millions of people in India. He started almost 20 years ago an organization called the Foundation for Ecological Security, which works with hundreds of thousands if not millions of people, on land restoration, on community empowerment. He was recognized this year for the incredible work that his organization has done through being a recipient of the Scholar Award just a few months ago. And at the end, we have Stephen Lowry, who's from CIFOR and a director of the Forest and Government's research portfolio. And again, somebody with incredible research credentials, but who also is very much engaged with bringing about change in the field that he works in. We have one more speaker who will join us, who's Joan, who's the head of the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact. And she's also an expert member for these 2 years for the UN Permanent Forum of Indigenous Peoples. She's also on the steering committee for the Global Call to Action, as are some of our colleagues here. I'll just finish by the introductions by introducing myself. My name is Michael Taylor. I'm the director of the Secretariat of the International Land Coalition. ILC is an alliance of many different kinds of organizations, a bit over 200 organizations, who do many different things, but come together around one issue, and that's the importance of land rights to realizing human well-being, to overcoming hunger, and to freeing people from poverty. And it brings together trade unions, research organizations, indigenous peoples organizations, women's organizations, intergovernmental organizations, research centers. So these issues are very close to our heart, and many of the organizations that you see represented here are also members of the ILC. So we're going to start. We know it's the end of the day, and I see a lot of quite sprightly faces, actually. I think if I was sitting there, I would be struggling to keep the energy levels up. But we're going to help you keep them up. It's going to be a bit of an interactive session. The way that it's going to work is we're going to have 2 speakers. They'll speak short, and I'll be right next to them, keeping a strong control on time in case they... Sometimes academics can speak a little bit longer than they should. Don't worry, I'm going to be firm. And then we're going to break after every 2 speakers and have a bit of interaction. We're going to give you the chance to divide into groups just for 2 or 3 minutes and think about 1 or 2 questions that you might want to ask, and we'll have some questions, and then we'll go on to the next speakers. So we'll do our best to keep you interested and engaged. So, Ruth, let's start with you. Ruth is going to be setting the stage for us and just giving us the big picture of why the commons are important and why securing tenure to the commons is important. Ruth, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Let's see, can we? Oops. Okay, is it this? Ah, magic. So Mike has very nicely set the stage of why this is important for us. Can I just start by seeing a show of hands, how many of you have heard of the tragedy of the commons? Okay, that saves a bit of time. How many of you believe that shared resources are inevitably degraded? Okay, I can see I have a little bit of work to. I hope to convince you that the real tragedy of the commons has been the notion that shared resources have to be either taken over by the state or privatized in order to be sustainable. So, what I'm going to start with, in terms of this Global Landscapes Forum and this critical time on climate change, is a framework we've been using that if you think about the time frame of any technology or natural resource management practice, from the short term to the long term, and the spatial scale. From the farm up to the nation, you can take it up to the global scale. Within that, something like new seeds for maize are short term, on farm, easy. A tenant can do it by herself. When you start looking at longer term things like soil carbon or agroforestry, you need to start worrying about the property rights, because without tenure security, people often don't have the authority, much less the incentive to make that investment. If you move it up the horizontal scale, integrated pest management or pollination services give relatively short term, but you can't do it by yourself. You need coordination. Now, almost all of what we're talking about as climate-smart agriculture are up in the area where both time and space matter. So therefore, you need to worry about both collective action and property rights. In fact, all of those things in that circled area are a form of commons. And if those were inevitably degraded, we'd all be in worse shape right now than we are. Now, at higher levels, there is certainly an important role for the state. But at the very local level, the state cannot do it all. There has to be collective action. So the commons are important both as whole landscapes, where you have forest landscapes or pastoral landscapes, as well as pieces of mosaics. So even in a landscape that may look like a lot of private property, there are usually pieces of commons in there that are playing important roles in the livelihoods, especially as fallback options for the poor, for women, pastoralists, fishers, forest-dependent communities. They provide a lot of things like fuel, firewood, fodder, medicinal plants, things like that, which go under the radar because they're not going through the market. And so often the state doesn't see them and doesn't value them. There are also a lot of environmental services, carbon, water, soil management, biodiversity, critical reserves of biodiversity, and pollination services, just for starters. Okay, so if this is important, does that mean we have to have a lot of formal organizations and land titling? Not quite. Collective action involves a lot more than just forming a formal group. It means really getting people to work together on a daily or periodic basis. And I'll come back to what that means. Also, property rights. There are many, many forms of property rights that can provide security of tenure that are shared forms. When we think about those property rights, we need to think about rights of access. In the UK, the right to walk your dog across the commons has been a really important stimulus for the UK Commons Act. To withdraw resources, exploit them, but especially to manage and exclude others from those resources. Alienation is usually a less a part of common property. For the commons, secure tenure requires that you have the external recognition by the state and by corporations and by outsiders that this is legitimate property rights. That's similar to private property, that you need that external recognition. Unfortunately, collective tenure is much less likely to get that state recognition, so this common property has been the most susceptible to land grabs, whether by outside corporations coming in or just by local elites taking up a bigger share. But commons also require internal regulation. Something like, we call them provision rules of who needs to provide what resources, and then extraction rules, who can take what, when, and how. And because these commons are usually multifunctional landscapes, it has to get quite specific. That requires knowledge of the resource, how it behaves, and a combination of external technical knowledge and local knowledge. But the users need to know the rules. They need to monitor this, and there have to be sanctioning mechanisms. Involving the users in setting those rules is really critical. I could go on, but rather than that, I'll point you to some resources we have that spell this out. And there are postcards outside that will direct you to all of that in a very carbon-friendly manner. I thank you for coming here and for engaging in this process, and I look forward to the rest of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Not only for a very lucid presentation, but you've set the example, haven't you, for finishing within time. So thank you. Professor Leroy, please come up and Professor Leroy will present in French, so feel free if you need to quickly nip out and get a headset, or if you have one already, put it on. There you go.
Bon, mesdames, messieurs, je suis passionné d'être ici. En même temps, comme professeur, j'ai une certaine difficulté à tenir en 7 minutes un exposé que généralement je développe en au moins 2 heures. Donc ça relève véritablement du défi. Et ce défi, donc, je vais essayer de le construire de la manière la plus synthétique possible. Tout d'abord, avant d'arriver à la question de la place des communs dans les politiques gouvernementales, les Français, le gouvernement français, les agences françaises ont rencontré d'énormes difficultés dont une partie d'entre elles sont synthétisées dans l'article que je cite ici, dans un ouvrage qui vient juste de paraître sur les communs et qui est un ouvrage extrêmement passionnant. Comment, pendant 30 ans, j'ai travaillé sur les communs sans le savoir. Voilà, hein, c'était au cœur même, si vous voulez, de difficultés intellectuelles, conceptuelles et techniques absolument fondamentales. Je n'ai pas le temps de rentrer dans ce type d'histoire, simplement pour vous dire que j'ai abordé ces questions en anthropologue, en Afrique, en commençant par le Sénégal, et en particulier un travail de terrain extrêmement riche pour moi chez les Wolofs du Sénégal, et que c'est à partir de ce type d'expérience que j'ai développé, à partir des années, la fin des années 60, un certain type de travail qui a été marqué en particulier en 1995 par un travail extrêmement intéressant avec notre mère à tous, Elinor Ostrom. C'est un séminaire qui s'est tenu à Paris à l'époque et qui m'a permis de confronter mes travaux que j'avais développés comme concepteur de la politique foncière aux Comores et un des auteurs de la réforme foncière de 1996 à Madagascar avec les travaux d'Elinor Ostrom. Je suis néo-ostromien, très néo, pas du tout dans le fil économiste, disons, mais en même temps, vous allez le voir tout à l'heure, un certain nombre d'idées qui sont en fait aussi dans la dette que nous avons tous à l'égard d'Elinor Ostrom. Mon propos est organisé en 2 temps. Premier temps, grâce à mon travail d'anthropologue, j'ai construit un type de démarche dans lequel on peut, à titre de modèle, identifier les principales caractéristiques de ce que représentent les communs, avec une question absolument fondamentale pour moi, c'est que dans ce type de perspective, il n'est pas question de parler de propriété et en particulier de common property. Les droits sur les communs s'exercent d'une manière qui est inclusive et non exclusive. Et ça, c'est le premier temps de mon exposé. Il est sans doute un peu scandaleux pour un certain nombre d'entre vous. Le deuxième temps, ça va être de travailler sur les communs intégrés et inclus, disons, dans des perspectives d'échange et de marché. Et à ce moment-là, nous nous trouvons dans des situations incroyablement plus complexes. Et c'est tout cela donc, que je vais essayer de représenter. Alors, cette première présentation, je vais passer très vite, elle est extrêmement riche. Elle présente l'essentiel de ce que nous croyons savoir sur les communs. Retenons au moins 3 idées. La première, les communs, c'est ce qui était à l'origine de nos sociétés. C'est la forme d'organisation très vraisemblablement connue par nos premiers ancêtres. Deuxième idée, et Ruth vient déjà d'en parler, le commun est construit autour de la notion de partage, et la notion de partage différenciée, voire opposée dans certains contextes de la conception de l'échange, va déterminer tout un ensemble de relations, en particulier cette idée que nous sommes en face de relations inclusives, et donc en fait, nous allons nous retrouver face à un certain nombre de réalités. Alors, une idée, mais je glisse là-dessus, n'est-ce pas? C'est pas simplement gérer la ressource qui est important, c'est faire commun, c'est faire société. C'est ça qui est finalement l'enjeu le plus important. Une des difficultés fondamentales des communs tels qu'ils se posent actuellement, en tout cas dans le contexte français du Comité technique foncier et développement, c'est quelles sont les bases juridiques à partir duquel on peut intervenir. Le common law est sans doute beaucoup plus favorable à une reconnaissance de l'originalité des rapports juridiques des commons que le droit civil français, que le droit civil de manière générale, qui, en fait, dès la Révolution française, a exclu les communs du champ juridique, et en particulier cette loi de 1793 a sorti les communs. Bon. Mais il est ici nécessaire d'aller plus loin et de se poser la question de quels sont les véritables droits qui sont en question. Alors là, je propose une première réponse avec la notion d'icône juridique. Je n'ai pas le temps d'entrer dans la discussion parce qu'il ne me reste même plus 2 minutes. Et je passe à ceci, je reviendrai peut-être sur cette question-là, sur la deuxième partie de mon exposé, c'est-à-dire les communs qui sont associés à des droits de propriété et comment, disons, ceci intervient. Donc, je considère que il est évident que dans une situation de ce que j'appelle transmodernité, les communs sont appelés à répondre à trouver un certain nombre de réponses dans ce type de situation, qu'il s'agit plus d'adaptation et non de véritable transformation ou révolution, que cette complémentarité est difficile à trouver, mais peut-être trouvable selon un certain nombre de questions. Et la minute qui me reste est consacrée à ce tableau qui est en partie en anglais, donc qui va vous faciliter un certain nombre de choses. Vous voyez qu'en ligne horizontale, donc en abscisse, vous avez des catégories qui sont en fait non pas empruntées, mais qui sont analogues à celles utilisées par Elinor Ostrom dans le cadre de ses travaux. Donc, il y a une conjonction de types d'analyses qui se sont faites entre 1990 et 1995 et qui ont donc abouti à adopter le schéma ostromien. Par contre, en ordonnée, vous avez certes les notions de public et de privé que l'on retrouve dans la littérature du développement, mais vous avez aussi des catégories différentes qui sont liées à l'analyse des rapports juridiques au sein des sociétés communautaires. Et ceci est une innovation d'autant plus intéressante qu'appliquée à tout un ensemble de situations en Afrique, en Amérique latine, dans mon propre village picard, dans le nord de la France, ces réponses ont apporté des solutions extrêmement intéressantes. La seule stabilisation, c'est la case tout à fait en bas, ownership, la propriété privée, est bien le seul cadre en fonction duquel vous pouvez aborder cette question qui est en fait, pour moi, un échiquier. C'est un échiquier à partir duquel on voit se développer l'ensemble des stratégies. Voilà, je crois que le stop est agitable ou agité. En tout cas, voilà, je suis désolé d'une présentation extraordinairement rapide, mais 7 minutes, c'est un coup près. Merci en tout cas pour votre attention. Et je m'assure, je répondrai à vos questions tout à l'heure.
Merci beaucoup, Professor. We've had a whirlwind tour of concepts of the commons from the past to the future. I saw some of you madly trying to take photos of the slides as we went through them, but they will be put online. So I think over the next few days, these presentations will be online, and you can get them and get the details of Prof's presentation. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to have a very short interaction session now. You've heard 2 presentations, sort of overviews of why the commons are important and where's thinking come about the commons. Just find 2 or 3 people near you. Introduce yourself first if you don't know them. and chat through anything that really provoked a question or a comment that you'd like to make, and then we'll hear a few of them. And I'm really only going to give you literally 2 or 3 minutes, so don't take time to go overcome your shyness, to say hello to the person next to you. Just do it quickly. It'll be less painful that way, and I'm sure you'll really enjoy having a conversation with a stranger. So with 2 or 3 or 4 or even 5 people next to you. No, it's one for both. Yeah. No. Okay. Okay. I hope you did. I hope you did quick introductions to each other, and you haven't just been introducing yourself up to now, but you actually had a chance to share some interesting questions or comments. So. Are there any little groups who've been chatting who you found you had a sort of coincidence of a shared comment or a question that you'd like to make? Put your hand up. Is that your own comment or it's a shared one? Okay, good. Okay. Okay, so I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to keep on the discussion. Let's start with you, sir, please. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name's Samuel Nandobe. I work in the Congo Basin. I come specifically from Cameroon. I like the 2 presentations, but I understand they were very fast. I have some very specific questions which I didn't see spelled out. How colonization, the role of colonization in commons, and also how indigenous communities who use land without giving value, like hunter-gatherers, they are land because there's no value, were called lands without masters. And other agricultural communities, they are lands because they were cultivated, they were attributed values through customary values. How do we address the problem of indigenous hunter-gatherers in the commons?
Okay.
Then, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a very clear question, and it's good it's clear because they're not going to answer the questions until the end. So we're just going to take a couple more.
Which one are you going to pick?
I have to be biased. This is for gender equity. Yes, please.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Nicola Ras from the Sahara and Sahel Observatory. I have a question concerning climate change, since we're here at the March of the Climate Change Conference, and I'm wondering, when I'm thinking about climate change and common property rights, where could we see linkages? And then I'm thinking about what other resources are there which could have an importance under common property rights, like, for example, carbon and soils, and how reforestation or deforestation on common property rights, how to establish mechanisms, how to include, how to integrate this into traditional ways of managing or regulating access to the various resources if new resources or values for new resources come up. And this now, particularly in the context of climate change.
Thank you. Thank you. Another clear question. So I'm sorry, I'm going to cut it there. I just wanted to avoid any frustrations by letting a couple of people talk. We're going to have time at the end where we come back. And so if you have a question, hold on to it, and you might get another chance at the end. But I'd like to move to the next speaker, who is Jagdish. Jagdish, please take the floor.
Yeah, from those intellectual presentations, I'm going to take you to a feel-good kind of a presentation. I'm basically a practitioner organization, Foundation for Ecological Security, and we are going to speak about India. Which one is this? Oh, yeah. Well, it's a small presentation, we don't have to go. The kind of values, the operating values that we as an organization got into commoning, and also the principles that guide us. Basically, we believe that all human beings are equal. In fact, some countries are far ahead. They treat all life forms as equal. Local communities, as one of the presenters was taking, popular perception about the capabilities of local people is very poor. Local people, as I mean rural people, is very, very poor. That translates into public policy, and people are reduced to beneficiaries, whereas governments tend to centralize or privatize. We believe that people have innate capacities. Third, that natural resources are finite. You take some means I get less. So how do we sit and discuss and dialogue? The fourth is we all owe these resources to future generations. These are the broad principles that guide us. In Indian context, yes, about 40 to 80 million hectares of land is called common, and about 40 million is called wastelands. A friend's question, he was asking about that. 40 million is still today's, that's about 1/6 to 1/7 of India, almost the size of Kenya. And 80 to 100% of people depend on it for a variety of things, firewood, fodder, medicine, etc. Over the last 30 years, about 30% has declined. Some of the proximate reasons that we attribute it to are, again, erosion of traditional management regimes and recognition of local rights over these resources. In this kind of a context, we work in some 10,000 villages spread across 6 biogeographical zones in India. In the eastern parts, it's indigenous people. Some of them are indigenous people, forest-dependent people, basically, and some are not indigenous people. In the western part, it's basically pastoralist, livestock production system. In southern part, it's mixed farming, and there are some specific ecosystems which we work, like ravines, etc. My presentation, I'm going to broadly touch at 2 levels. What do we do at local level, and what do we do with governments? At the local level, basically formalize whatever is their customary traditional practices, formalize as in government recognizing them. Some of the villages are not that egalitarian, challenge them on issues of gender or issues of inclusion of the poor people. Basically, people try to develop roles and responsibilities, divide duties, kind of construct rewards and punishments, and the next part of it is basically getting rights to these resources. We have 4 types of arrangements in India. Revenue lands lease, we have worked with governments, 15 years to 99 years, to the whole community as a whole, not to individuals, to the whole village. Co-management, where it is just a recognition of the partnership of the local community, and about 50 to 100% of the produce is given to village people. That's the joint forest management. More recently, the community forest rights, where everything, the land is also transferred back to the village people, a repossession of land. Government of India calls it correcting a historical injustice, and strengthening existing tenure. In panchayats, where the tenure is already there, how do we strengthen them? Then the third part of it is, when we have the tenure and we have the institutions, how do you go about restoring degraded systems? A variety of technical measures go in, and conservation plans are done. It's not one village. If you see this one, it's about 100 kilometers diagonal, village after village, different types and categories of land, managing commons and individual lands. We work with state governments into getting public funds, into campaigning after that for securing commons. Some villages we work directly, other villages spread the message. We build capacities. We have 2 rural colleges where people, some thousands and thousands of people, in India thousands is not a big number. And we also collaborate with and form platforms at local level so that people sit and dialogue on the land use and water use. How are we doing? This is a quick thing on how we bring in science and technology into that. This is about soil and moisture conservation, basically understanding the geology of that area, the slope of the area, the land use, land cover. So this is a district, because when we're being asked by the governments to scale up, this is a district in South India, identify the drainage, and based on the technology available, get into good recharge, moderate recharge area for soil and moisture conservation. This is bad for recharge area, and this should be only conservation action. With this kind of a work, what happens is what you got to see. These are lands from 2001, the same piece of land in 2008, the same piece of land in 2014. This is in South Andhra Pradesh, 2009, again in 2014. Rajasthan, Western India, 2004, 2009, 2014 again. Moyakada, Madhya Pradesh, Central India, 2004, 2006, and 2014, pastoral and shrublands, basically. This is again in South India, scrublands, the dramatic changes that are happening, a wildlife-rich area, sloth bears. This is in Eastern India, the kind of forest that happens. Again, South India, and so on and so on. I hope you're feeling good. How are you doing on the time? Oh, lovely. Just to say that it's spread out throughout India. It's in 8 provinces, 6 out of the 10 biogeographic zones. Different places, you have forests, sometimes pastures. And visual things, sometimes people don't believe. We get into ground truthing. Some forests are doing good. They're getting better, dense, but some pockets are not doing so good. Again, there are issues of, with all this conservation, people seem to be extracting more than the regeneration capacity, so that they bring a second set of issues which have to be talked about at landscape level. This is under landscape, which is at a watershed in Rajasthan. Wonderful changes. Basically, improvement in double crops, that is people getting almost 2 paychecks in a month. Improvement in the forest cover. In the villages that work, people do not have to migrate for want of fodder, for want of water for animals. That's the kind of way the geology supports. You don't really have to migrate for water. And of course, there are a variety of things of food and fodder security and medicines which come along. The emerging issues, while there is considerable progress made around valuing ecosystems, ecological services, ecological functions, somehow we find that collective action is taken for granted. How do we value collective action? That's something we're trying to grapple with. The work that we're doing at a village level and inter-village level, there are several other complexities coming up which are about what is the role of government, what is the role of the local communities, what are the roles of the other people, and collective choice arrangements, sometimes adjudicatory arrangements. What are the kind of arrangements which are necessary for managing landscapes? The last one is sometimes, sorry, there's a mistake, aligning land and water policies. Most of the public policy is land-centric or water-centric, but what happens on land impacts water and the other way around. There you go. Oh,
Okay, well, thank you, Jagdish. Perfect timing, and I think you've inspired us not just by seeing what's possible, and it's amazing, isn't it? I mean, those pictures were 10 years apart, but by showing us it can be done and it can be done at scale. And as I listen to many discussions about the future and about what needs to be done, the issue of scale often comes back, that we see good practices, we see solutions in local context, but can they really be brought to scale? And I think you've shown that very clearly in what you've just showed us. So I'd like to invite our next speaker, Joan Carlin. Joan, I introduced you while you weren't here. So I gave them the usual what you do, but what I didn't say is Joan is one of those people that you know the toys that you wind up like this, and they slowly wind down and go slower and slower. She never winds down, never, never. Joan is a complete bundle of energy and is really doing an amazing work on the rights of indigenous people, not just in Asia, where her organization, I think, has 47 members, but really globally, through the UN Permanent Forum, through many global processes. So it's really a great privilege to have you here, Joan. Thank you. And we look forward to hearing you. Oh, there's no, okay.
Okay, good afternoon. I want to start with I always struggle if the podium is taller than me. Then I get hidden, right? So now at least it has a side corner where I can sit. Okay, the topic given to me is on indigenous perspectives on collective territorial rights. And I want to start by the historical context of why we claim for collective rights of indigenous peoples over our lands, territories, and resources. And as we all know, since time immemorial, indigenous peoples, we are already taking care and nurturing our lands, territories, and resources with the view that we need to take care of these resources for the future. So meaning we are stewards of the land. We own it to pass it to the next generation. So inherently, the concept of working together to protect the environment, the resources that we have, is necessary so that we have something for our children and the future generation. So that has always been there. These historical relations with our territories has always been there, even before states were formed. And so when states were formed, they suddenly took over, right? And grabbed and colonized us and assimilated us. But we persisted. We persisted. That's why we're still here. That's why we still maintain not all our territories, but we're able to maintain our territories. And the only way we can maintain our territories is through our collective, to maintain also our social cohesion, our collectivity. Because that's the only way we can survive. That's the only way we can protect our resources. And when we talk of collective territorial rights of indigenous peoples, what are we talking about? We're not just talking about our lands, territories, and resources as physical elements, but we're also talking about our sustainable resource management systems. We're talking about our traditional knowledge. We're talking about our cultural heritage. We're talking about our sacred sites. We're talking about our traditional occupations. These are all in one. We do not separate one from the other. And that's what we're saying, that we view things in a holistic way. That what you do to one will affect the other. So it's an integrated approach when we deal with resource management, right? So the concept of protecting our forests is not just having the trees, but also making sure that the forest produce the water, the forest produce food for the animals and not just for us. So it's a holistic approach on how we view these things, and that's integrated, and that we only make use of our resources based on our needs. So we get wood to build our house, but not to sell. We harvest, fruits for our use. I still remember 5 years ago that when I visited tribal areas, you see tomatoes, eggplants, mangoes on the trail. And those were harvested by the people who have those trees, but they cannot consume all the fruit. So they put it on the side for other people to get when they walk through. That's the spirit of sharing, that you share what you have. If it's beyond your need, then you share it. And that is the very principle of resource management that we carry. And that is something that I think we can learn from. This kind of resource management that does not only provide the narrow thinking of what is for me, but also what I can share. And that we need to protect this for the future use. Now, these are the values, but of course we know that has changed. It has changed now. And what are the factors of this change? One is because the national policies, programs of states do not recognize this. There's a conflict of worldview at the very outset. The state promotes individual ownership, individual competition, resource use, instead of upholding what I said earlier. And there's also the challenge of the existing development paradigm of promoting profit more than need and more than sustainability for the people. So now if we look at and then it does not also, the legal system does not also allow legal pluralism, when we say legal pluralism, it should also allow the recognition of our customary laws, because it's our customary laws that guides us in the way we use our resources collectively, the common property. But that's not allowed. And also the issue of cultural diversity, that we should also respect cultural diversity, because we are diverse and we need to respect that. You may be, well, somebody can be a Christian. Us, we have our own set of beliefs as well. So I saw the sign. I only have 1 minute left now. So just to end, I think there are a lot of things that we can reflect from the experience and perspectives and worldviews of indigenous peoples. But at the same time, there are things that we need to unlearn, because we're very much used to individual thinking that we cannot already think out of the box and think, this is the challenge that we face now. Either we act together to address climate change, for example, to really uphold how Mother Earth can be protected, also not just for climate change, but for sustainable development. And it's only through upholding the common good, the common interest of all, by making sure that we share our resources for the people, that there is equity, then these are the kind of questions that we need always to ask when we talk of how we're going to take action, so that we uphold what we say as the common good, or the what is good for Mother Nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Joan. Joan, thank you very much. So we've heard two presentations. One from India saying that we can recover in the commons what we've lost. We can recuperate those degraded lands. And then we've heard the presentation from Joan saying we have the commons because we've looked after them, because indigenous peoples have been custodians of those commons for generations. And the reason the world still has many of these commons is because the commons have had their custodians. So I'll give you a bit of chance to get back into your little discussion groups with your new friends. If new people have come in, we just give you 2 or 3 minutes in groups of 3 or 4, just to reflect on these two conversations, throw out any questions you may have, and then we'll have one more speaker, and then we're going to collect we're going to invite your questions from the floor. So, give you 2 minutes, get in there, because I'm going to be quick in cutting you off. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm gonna cut you off. I'm gonna cut you off. Now, I just ask you if in your buzz groups you had an interesting comment or question that you'd like to throw out, to hold on to it. Because you're going to get the chance, but just don't forget it. We're going to have one more presentation, and then we're going to open up and we're going to take some questions from the first buzz groups and the second buzz groups. But Stephen is going to close off for us with the last presentation, looking a little bit at the economic case for the commons. And this is coming out of a very, very interesting research project, which you're doing with colleagues. And I think, have you presented on this research before? Are we the first to?
First, yes.
Well, we feel very privileged. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Just click your presentation.
Let's see. Let's see. There it is. Yeah. Okay. So there's. Oops. Sorry. Okay. Great. Thank you, Michael, and thanks everyone for being here. This is the title of my topic, Investment in the Sustainable Commons, Conditions for Commons-Based Enterprises. And I think this is sort of stands in some harmony and some maybe juxtaposition with some of the other discussions today, because we are talking about the commons, where very importantly, it's a very important principle, people gain access to land as a social right and not through the market. And this is what I think Joan would agree, this is a very, very important attribute of access rights and tenure. However, the commons is now coming into engagement with the market as people's rights to the land, these social rights are being increasingly statutorily recognized in some places. There's been some movement toward devolution of rights of forests from the state to communities. Between 2002 and 2008, that balance shifted from about 76% administered directly by the state to about 65%. That doesn't sound like a big change, but in Latin America, that was significant. About 30% of all land rights that were administered by the state have shifted to local communities. Not so much progress in Africa or Asia. And so now that there's in sort of this movement, let me see if I can. There's been some success toward rights devolution. Questions arise with respect to how people can better utilize those land rights in ways that reduce poverty and contribute to sustainable economic growth. So once again, communities have secured stronger rights to common property over the past 30 years. Much remains to be done. Rights movement has been supported by effective advocacy campaigns represented by many of the folks here. The voluntary guidelines to tenure, FPIC, Global Call to Action, which Michael has already mentioned. However, the progress on rights draws attention to persistent poverty in many commons communities. Tenure security and rights clarification creates conditions for secure investment and sharing of common benefits. That's the hypothesis. Attention now is needed on building local governance capacities and social and commercial enterprises capable of generating economic benefits, fostering inclusive growth, and securing investment. These are the kinds of later questions here that I think are on the table now, and I think they constitute sort of a new generation of common property development questions and management questions. So here's the proposition. Inclusive growth, leveraging the productive assets of commons lands is possible. However, certain elements are necessary, and the absence of any one of these elements will complicate the situation considerably. Equitable and secure resource tenure. This goes without saying, and this is where we're seeing some progress. Locally appropriate mechanisms for managing natural resources, including for assigning rights, responsibilities, and benefits locally. This is sort of an outcome that one can't necessarily take for granted, because there are inequities within communities as well that have these socially based rights. There need to be appropriate local institutional arrangements for developing and managing business relationships with outside enterprises and investors. This capacity is often absent. Commercial or nonprofit service providers for brokering deals, connecting supply chains, building confidence are necessary. Resource-based commodities or services that are valued by markets need to be present in the commons landscape. There need to be market linkages between sustainable supply chains, and they need to be efficient and effective enterprises and partners. And so I'm going to speak to just one of these issues here, which is the question of land and resource-based commodities or services valued by markets. High-value marketable commodities or services are important. If communities are looking to benefit from the resources, there must be a careful assessment, in fact, of the value of those, of what resources are going to attract investment interest and market interest. Market conditions need to be favorable, organized supply chains need to be present, access to financial services will matter increasingly. The agribusiness sector builds the supply chains, public sector provides public goods, including roads, energy, security, land administration services. These are all things that need to be there, arguably, for people to benefit from their better and more secure rights over resources. And this next point relates to the whole question of sustainability. The certification of commodities and territories connects producers to supply chains and important markets with increasingly high environmental, social, and governance standards. This is how engagement with the market can help ensure environmental sustainability. Then the volume of financial capital searching for high ESG investment opportunities, such as zero deforestation places, certified commodities. 60% of all coffee marketed today is certified. Social inclusion standards. They're more likely to attract capital as consumers demand sustainably produced commodities. Territorial certification is an example of a new approach to certification that is gaining ground in Brazil. Okay, I'm going to rush along here. So I'm going to offer two really examples of this engagement between the commons and markets. Namibia meets many of these requirements that I've just listed. There's a 1996 law that has accorded Namibian communities virtual ownership rights to wildlife existing in their territories. By 2015, there are now 82 conservancies in Namibia. These are wildlife-based conservancies. They cover 20% of the land area of the country. This is a country larger than France, smaller population. They generate benefits for about 9% of the population. And this is where the revenue's coming from, joint venture tourism. People have the land, and the statutorily recognized customary rights. They have the rights to the wildlife. They enter into joint ventures with tourism companies. They also have control over hunting licenses, so they sell those licenses to hunters and so on. So here's a map. The areas in green show these 82 community conservancies in Namibia. There's been considerable positive economic and social benefit, generated employment. The growth and the environmental impacts have been significant. There's been significant growth in wildlife population attributed to the conservancies. Elephants' numbers have increased from 7,600 in 1995 to 20,000 in 2012. Black rhino were near extinction in 1980. Now they're the largest black rhino population in Africa is in Namibia. I think it's something like 2,000 out of 5,000 black rhino in Africa. Lion range has increased tenfold, and so on. Now, there are challenges based on some work that we've looked at. Institutional capacity in the conservancies remains weak. There's some declining funding from donors, increasing wildlife human conflict. There is growing poaching of rhinos and elephant by organized crime cartels. And there's some social media assaults on this whole idea of trophy hunting, which provides 40% of the conservancy. So I see I've got to stop here, and I'll skip over the Mayan. But these are some conclusions that we really take account of, some conditions that are necessary for this engagement between communities and the market, and particularly this need for capacity for local enterprise management is very important. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Steve. Okay, so we're gonna open up for a time of discussion now. I'd just like to introduce one more important person in this session to you. Luca, could you stand up quickly? Luca is doing the almost impossible job of summarizing everything. But not only is he going to summarize everything, but he for the report, which will go into the proceedings of the Global Landscape Forum, but he's going to say it to you at the end as well, very briefly. So just know that it's being recorded and it's going to be expertly summarized by Luca in the last 3 minutes of our session. Okay, so we're gonna open up for questions or comments. Just a reminder, we had a question on hunter-gatherers and how we deal with commons that have been used by hunter-gatherers, and we had a question on the links between the commons and addressing climate change. Any other thoughts, questions, or comments reflecting back on all of the presentations. Yes, at the back there. Please introduce yourself and be short.
Thank you. Keith Weeby from IFPRI. Two questions, one of which came from our small group. But first of all, Stephen, thanks for your presentation. Commons institutions have evolved over time. When you introduce new types of returns and revenue, cash versus kind or different timing and so forth, what is the experience of those institutions in evolving to manage those new types of revenue streams? That's one question. The second one was for Jagdish. Thank you for your presentation. We felt very good about the transformation that we saw on your slides. We missed what was the key intervention that made those possible. Was it a technical solution, an institutional innovation? If you could elaborate on that, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then there was a question here, please.
Good afternoon. Gustavo Garduno from Conavio, Mexico. I've been working like for maybe the last 10 years in communities that have like common property rights, and in my opinion, there is a lot of conflict. It's not so easy as putting some rules. And my question for the speakers is the following. Do you think that commons will be still successful in managing their natural resources under the conditions of the global economy? When I say this, I mean, for example, in Mexico, we have transnational communities. I mean, some members of that communities live in the United States and sometimes go back to the communities and they lost the traditional knowledge. They have different interests than the people that stay in the communities. And I wonder if, as well, sometimes in my line of work, I've seen that these communities really, they have horrible rules that, for example, they forbid women to vote, or they have really inequality, they promote inequality somewhat in the communities. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good challenge. I'll take one more question at the back over there, at the very back in the middle. And then we'll get to the speakers before we do a second round. Yes, please.
My name is Tungarai from Nepal. I work with the Federation of Indigenous Nationalities in Nepal. I missed a little bit of earlier talks, but I'm just wondering, maybe the question to any of the panelists, in the face of climate change or the sustainable development goals, we are talking about the commons, but as your experiences in different forums and different institutions, how far have we been able to consider the social, environmental, and cultural returns of the commons? Most often time we forget about this and look only after the economic returns. Could you please say the experiences, how far we have been able to see these returns of the commons? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, let's go back to the panel. There were two questions which were directed at individual panelists, one for Jagdish, one for Steve. So why don't we hear the two of you first, and then we'll open up to the more general questions.
Firstly, it is the institutional spaces. Basically, what we do is try and formalize the customary norms of village life, where they are already managing shared resources. The second comes as tenure, as in basically because sometimes governments wake up soon, sometimes they don't wake up. So if there is a contestation and claim going on, sometimes sooner than later they would be getting the tenure right. The third thing we also fix is eco-restoration, but in a country like India where there's so much of sunshine and monsoon, nature automatically takes care of itself. So I would say institutions and tenure.
Thank you, Jagdish. Steve?
Yeah, I think going to Keith's question and his group, the whole question of this, how effective have commons institutions been in managing new kinds of relationships, and maybe I'll extend it to external markets and opportunities. And I would say, I can't speak really with confidence as a generalization, but I'd say certainly anecdotally that often not very well. And this is, I think, the point of the argument here is that securing rights is one thing, but then taking those rights into new kinds of relationships in ways that benefit local communities economically is a new challenge, a huge challenge. And the evidence of just the two cases here were that a kind of business collective, if you will, collective and representational business acumen needs arguably to be present, or there certainly needs to be some support through sort of intermediaries that allow those communities' interests to be effectively represented through some kind of interim period. But in dealing with markets, dealing with investors, there needs to be what you might call a new kinds of institutional fit, is what we talk about, where there's also an understanding and alignment with the legal and rights kinds of environment, but also with the kind of business world, if you will. And so that's kind of an observation that I would make in response.
Thank you. And then on the more general questions, would any of the other panelists like to respond to particular ones? Ruth.
Sure. Let me try and pick up a couple of themes and then point questions back to Steve, Jagdish, and some of the other panelists, if I may. This question about how to consider cultural returns to the commons, ecosystem returns, your question about, your original question about in the context of climate change, what new values. So these other benefits are coming to the surface. One approach that has been is to do payments for ecosystem services or payments for these other kinds of returns. Actually, there's evidence that that often backfires, that there is less provision when these kinds of benefits get commoditized. So that's a very it is one strategy that has been used. When that happens, you have to make sure that the returns are going to the community and not being captured by, for example, a lot of the carbon payments go to those who have private tenure and so have been bypassing the commons. But in terms of the cultural returns, the phrase that's going through my head is the song, "You don't know what you've got till it's gone." And that was actually a factor in the UK Commons Act as to why in 2006 the UK passed a law that, okay, a lot of the commons was already gone by then, but the fact that people wanted to be able to walk their dogs and have the landscapes that were part of their cultural heritage, and they suddenly realized, hey, wait a minute, there's a lot of biodiversity there, we have to have these things. And I think what may be needed is to valorize that in other places before it's too late. And I wanted to point that to, well, Joanne, Jagdish, you each have experience. You've been talking about how do we valorize, how do we get recognition to that. And Steve, you've also been talking about how getting corporations to this, the new types of investments. How are they valuing? How are they putting that into the valuation in the corporate calculations?
Did I say panelists could ask questions to other panelists? That was a little bit sneaky, Ruth. Okay, I will allow if Joanne, would you like to respond either to your fellow panelists' question or to the panelists that came from the floor?
Just to be honest, I'm struggling in my head with because it's like we know that the development paradigm that's now the market, the investments, etc., is actually the one destroying the commons, right? And is it the way again to save the commons? That's something that I think we need to reflect upon, because is it a matter of making a market, putting a values to these commons, and putting it again because we know that the market is not in the hands of communities, it's in the hands of corporations, and even who puts value to the commons that we have? And what value is being used? It's the supply, demand driven, market driven, and it's not the value that indigenous peoples and local communities put to those things that we share, the common. So for me, that's the big question. Is it the right direction? Or do we need to find other means? And that's what I'm thinking, that we need to now think out of the box and really reflect on what's the best way for us to ensure that the commons are still shared, that it's the people that benefit from it, and that it is sustainable. So I would, again, reflect on those points. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the landscape is pretty variable here. I'm thinking of Namibia, where I've lived for 5 years and worked many years in Southern Africa. The commons became under the sort of the apartheid, under the sort of particular market economy, labor reserves. Okay, so they were depleted of investment. They were denied investment. There were no job opportunities. Land became degraded and overgrazed. People went into the labor markets in the cities, but they did retain their rights to land, which they've better secured in the post-apartheid era in Namibia and South Africa. Then the question becomes, you visit the villages, you find that most working age men are employed in the towns, that there are areas of social reproduction, which is important. People are very determined to hold on to those rights, but the land is highly degraded through inappropriate use of livestock. And these areas in Namibia are very, very, very dry. What are they best suited for? They're suited for wildlife, which is part of historically a traditional economy. Okay, so but what this investment has enabled the communities to do is to basically give up their livestock, regain rights to wildlife, which they always had before the colonial period. And then, who wants to enjoy wildlife environments? Well, people with money, as it turns out. Okay, and so people, a huge increase in employment, locally based, huge improvement in carbon conditions, in that the overgrazing has gone away, and so on and so forth. So this is sort of an environmental, a social, and a cultural achievement. However, there are challenges. Markets are uncertain, highly variable, subject to change, and they negotiate. They're really tough negotiators. And so it's kind of an ability to get the best for the community through the business process that's very, very important. And this is where there's a weakness and a vulnerability, I think, and that's sort of a key lesson from the Namibia case and from some other cases.
Yeah, thank you. I think that it's very interesting, isn't it? We're really seeing how the commodification of the commons is as much part of the problem as part of the solution, as much part of the solution as part of the problem. We're going to have to start winding towards the end. So there were a couple of other questions. Jagdish, you want to?
I'll take the Mexicans.
Yes, exactly, on the conflict.
Yeah, I was not even trying, not that you were asking me the question, but I do know village communities make terrible mistakes, yeah? But so do governments and so do individuals, yeah? And in fact, governments make bigger mistakes, are more costlier. The cost of a mistake is much, much higher there. The second element is villages are quicker at responding to crisis. They're cost effective, they're quicker to respond, and they can visualize complexities and find simpler solutions than a distant government can do. Yeah. The third point is the whole act of commoning is an engagement. If you're saying there are inequalities, if you don't do anything about inequalities, the status quo would actually reinforce those power structures. Unless one engages with them, you can't really talk about equalizing or reducing inequalities.
Thank you. And any sort of 1-minute comments on the link to climate change? Why are the commons important to what we're looking at this week and these 2 weeks in particular with climate change? Who can answer that question in a minute? Professor?
I might take a pot shot at it.
Go ahead, Jagdish.
If you don't mind a practitioner responding. I was telling someone earlier today afternoon about this climate. I do visualize, and actually I had a discussion with no one less than Lynn on this issue. Global commons are actually, oceans, air are actually global commons. And I did have a talk wherein if you visualize each nation state as a village, yeah, that's what exactly the village commons are all about also. They're trying to manage a pasture like a global air or global commons. I'm sure we can find ways of this common and differentiated responsibilities, which is actually what village people do also at a village level. I don't know if I have connected. If you can imagine a nation state like an individual in a village, then you become a global village.
Thank you. Okay, I'd hope to open for some more comments, and I'm really sorry we're coming near the end. I'm going to ask you in a little while just to sort of give a last 30-second few thoughts each of you. So you might want to collect your thoughts on what the key message you'd like to leave with us. But I'd just like to jump to Joan first before we go. Joan, we've been putting up this hashtag Land Rights Now, which is part of a campaign. Do you want to say a few more words about the campaign and how people can get involved?
Yes, this is a global campaign that hopefully will generate the kind of support that indigenous peoples and local communities need for the recognition of our land rights at the local level. So this is a campaign that will generate we think the demands for states to make laws or implement laws that recognize land rights, and also to generate the kind of technical support, but more importantly is also to bridge the solidarity and cooperation amongst and between indigenous peoples, local communities, NGOs, donor communities, other partners who are in recognizing land rights of indigenous peoples, that is, and local communities, that is critical in addressing climate change, in addressing poverty, and in promoting sustainable development. So if we all come together in one platform, then we can make a difference. So I encourage you all to be part of this campaign.
Thank you very much, Joan. And if you want to find out more about what the campaign actually involves and how you can join up, you can go to the website to the same name, www.landrightsnow.org. If you've either already signed up or you intend to sign up, you tell Joanne, she might give you one of these little bangles. I don't know, have you got them with you? Okay, so we can't even bribe you to join the campaign. You'll have to do it out of your own free will. Tomorrow at the booth. Okay, there will be a booth in the Indigenous Peoples Pavilion tomorrow to do that. Okay, so let's do a quick rundown about the title of our discussion has been Common Tenure for a Common Future. So with that in mind, what can be the pearls of wisdom, the 30-second pearls of wisdom that you'd like to leave us with as we close?
I think recognizing the securing the tenure of the commons is important to work with communities so that we really can have the kinds of climate-smart agriculture as well as carbon sequestration and other things that we're seeking.
In French, sorry. Je pense que nous entrons dans un monde nouveau et qu'à partir de ce moment-là, nous sommes obligés d'être en invention constante, en sachant que nous allons remettre en question tous les éléments fondamentaux de notre mode de vie actuellement. L'État, le droit, le marché, tout ça est en train d'être remis en question et nous devons, ensemble, construire de nouvelles réponses à la hauteur de la complexité du XXIe siècle.
Yeah, excellent point, actually. My suggestion is when you're looking at community tenure, also look at the successes that are happening in the other realms, like Wikipedia, Creative Commons, Linux. These are all commoning in a different world altogether. While we are saying these are failing, those are all succeeding. So why is that happening?
Yeah. I just coming back to the market, and I would sort of urge for a moment to humanize isn't the right word, but think of the market as consumers, and increasingly consumers, it's just not a modest, small, boutique kind of effort. They're demanding en masse that the goods that they buy that come from anywhere in the world, including the tropics, be produced sustainably and in ways that recognize the rights of people and communities. That's a powerful, powerful partner. And these people are in the room. They're all over Paris. They're all over, you know, the world. And that an alignment, this is when we can talk about a kind of alignment of interest, that to seize that can yield huge benefits, because stuff that's not produced sustainably, people just are not going to buy, including socially sustainably. So this is an ally and not something to necessarily continue to be obviously dismissive of. Skepticism is always healthy, but also it's kind of it's a new world, I think, in that regard, and we need to take that on board.
Well, for me, it's more that this is the time for collective action to secure land rights, and that action should involve everyone from the community level up to the global level. So I join you again for the call to action. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to invite Luca up. Luca is Land Policy Advisor at Oxfam Novib, based in The Hague. And it's always a great pleasure to introduce a man who is one of the biggest champions of women's land rights. So Luca, please come.
Okay.
I didn't hear anyone mention women's land rights. So if he includes it in a summary...
He's my former boss, you know, so it tends to speak too much. So this is not the first time Ruth asked me to close one of the panels. So it's an honor, but I think it's also a big challenge. So I don't know if Ruth has something against me in particular. This is not my only role. I was also the person who was keeping time. So now there's no person keeping time. So I can speak. So why I think I would say it's important that I close, because I come from an organization that is Oxfam, which is different from most of the organizations here. We work on land rights. We work on land rights through programs and advocacy, but we are not necessarily the technical organization. We are doing that because we are concerned about human rights and justice, and this is related to most of the things that Joan have been said today. And we are concerned about the big questions that everybody is asking nowadays, even at the COP, about how to address the challenges of our time, food security, in a world with finite resources, inequality. And to Oxfam, working to secure and strengthen the commons is one of the resources, the solutions. It's a model that works. And the other, I think, added value for Oxfam, and I think one of the reasons we have been invited to host this panel, is that because we have to speak outside of this room. We have to speak with people who do not necessarily understand what the word tenure is. They don't understand what land rights is. We have to speak with the urban citizens. We have to speak with students, other researchers. And I think this is a commitment for all of us, as a scientist, as a campaigner, as a practitioner. And I think this is important. So keeping just some highlights from this panel. The first thing I took note of is complexity. Hearing about the commons is clear that it's about managing complexity. We heard words like holistic approach, integration, various pressures, we heard a lot about governance. And I think this is wider benefits other than markets and values. I think this is an important word for our time. And on the heart of this complexity, there are two words. One is the recognition. The first of all is we need to promote the recognition of the land rights of communities. And the second one is governance. Most of the question about viability, also the question of internal, what is happening within the communities, are actual questions about the governance, which come after the recognition. And then just three points. The first one is an important point made by Jagdish about the respect for ecological boundaries. I think this is something that asks us to change our paradigm. Then an important point about future and future generations. This is not just our problem, it's the problem of the next generation. So the question is, at least for Oxfam, the commons is one of the ways where we can best help future generation to address the same challenge of us in the future. And then from Steve and others, also Jagdish again, I think the main message from this panel is that commons work. So we have these impressive photos from Jagdish, which are quite amazing, about restoration. And then we have cases of economic viability of the commons.